Long touted as culturally the strongest region in the entire world and the kingdom of esports, the LCK has come back and with a new format. And here, my goal today is to explore that with you as much as possible, and arguably the highest tiers of play that we get to spoil ourselves with. And it's 2025. We have a brand new format here. Fearless Draft is in full swing, and I wanted to use this video as a kind of like an exploration piece to show what teams like T1 and DRX are able to kind of perform and kind of show their adjustments when they're pushed to the limits of their champion pool. And a team like T1 is going to be excellent at showcasing just what the power of a deep champion pool can do. We know these players do have really deep ones, and they can access so many different things. It has been nerfed a little bit, obviously, because they have swapped out Zeus for Doran with the 2025 changes, but the level of cookery that's in the lab here for T1 is definitely unmatched. I do think DRX put up a really good fight here, but clearly you can see there's so many more options within Fearless Draft and so many more capabilities that you can do that I don't think we've really fully hashed out and explored, and that's what makes it so interesting and dynamic. And overall, side tangent here on Fearless Draft itself, it makes for a very exciting and dynamic format that makes it really hard to kind of like really get a good read on the meta, right? Historically, with league metas, there's a few champions that you think, oh yeah, these are the guys, they're good. And then draft's basically just going to go like this on blue. It's going to be like this on red. And then teams can basically plan out and hash out entire scenarios and flowcharts and things of that nature. But now with Fearless Draft, it's so dynamic and so different, right? And you can just go for different strategies. And I think there's so many different openers that you can go for that, given specific contextual cues, it's that much more important to pick up on every champion that's removed and what this means for the remainder of the pool. And things can go up in priority, things can go down in priority, and certain combinations that can be super unlocked just because you can set yourself up in Fearless Draft beforehand. And that's the power and the magic of something like this change, and I really like that. So moving on to this first game, DRX go for the classic Vibe 1 priority, and T1 have been going for the route where they go for the Jace flex as well as a Xin Zhao sort of counterpick domination early game sort of vibe. Let's call it vibe, right? And not too much to note in the bans here. I believe Red Side doesn't have too many, let's say, openings in terms of and flexibility of what they want to go for. However, you do know the Cassante ban on red here as well as the Callista, and DRX answer with the Caitlyn, which is very T1 specific. So with that in mind, the main thing I would note in this draft is just that T1 are really willing to adapt to the needs of this meta, and then they break the Jace flex as necessary as they get the confirms that DRX are giving them. So their draft fundamentals are still very, very sound in this case, right? And with that in mind, they're sacking a lot of what they used to play, right? And what they've historically were successful on in last season. And it just shows how dynamic and flexible they are. And you can see that it's still early season as well, and teams are still adjusting. But I do think T1 have a pretty good grasp as to what's been good. I have not seen much success from this Vi so far. However, this is a composition that does not too bad into it, with the exception of the Xayah. So this is why something like the Jace is so coveted in this current meta, right? It's very flexible. It's very open to team compositions thanks to his new flexibility build due to tank Jace. So he has a lot more of a flatter matchup curve, and because of that, he threatens a poke condition against many teams, which is very threatening at basically all stages, right? Whenever a team can create a poke condition and they can play around that and you can blind it that early, then it creates a lot of problems, right? That's why Varus is like such a prominent pick in so many metas, right? Jace offers a similar sort of compositional flexibility with arguably even more flexibility than Varus due to his ability to play both as a frontliner and sort of like a semi-backliner with the poke, right? And that's the issue with that here. So some things that to note with Fearless as well is that all these champs that have been picked are now gone from the pool, right? So the moment I'm picking all of these, if I'm Tom or if I'm Song here, I'm immediately thinking of my next opener, right? This B1 could be this could be a setup for subsequent games, right? You are allowed to sort of give up certain bans because let's say you give the pick to them, then you can get rid of the champion for the rest of the series. These are things that contextually do make sense, and I'm not sure if teams have been cooking that deep yet, and I want to see if they are thinking that heavily about it, especially in best of 5 scenarios, which we have yet to see, right? Best of 3s, it's not too bad. The champion pools are not too limited. You can prep things for like game 1 and then game 2, and then game 3 you kind of go by feel. That's something you could go for, or you could go purely by feel and kind of react based on what they see, so that you can even do counter picks based on what, like balancing a matchup and then removing champions from the pool, and then you can kind of go it from there. And it's like so interesting, and I think there's so many more options here. So let's tie it back to this overall draft between T1 and DRX. I do think this is quite Jace. You see my bias here. You can see this is quite T1 favorite just due to the Jace, as well as getting pretty solid matchups all around. I think current answers that DRX are like leaning towards are decent on paper, like stylistically. However, I don't think the champions, there's going to be a lot of like flavor of the month type of things where like certain champions that make sense on paper, they're just not going to be carrying the same amount of oomph that they used to, right? And while the Ezreal into the Xayah is a classic one of this because of the prominence of Jace, it could just be the solution being that a Jace ban was probably necessary or more priority on it. And I do think some more teams that are able to pilot it should be prioritizing this more. And this is a great example of it. So T1 basically just curb stomped them in the first game, and Owner gets completely on top. So second game 2. This is where I would like to kind of highlight how this draft can kind of change. And because of the picks that were already gone, teams can stylistically go for something completely different, right, based on what was picked. I don't think this is one of those games per se, except for the fact that Vi being gone for sure eliminates one of the main true engage tools in the game, and Bessa being gone also flattens out the matchup curve. So therefore, K'Sante priority is even higher now because of one of those matchups being removed, right? So now DRX go for a different route. Some things that there are some cases where champions are just not allowed to go through, or it's just not worth it, even despite trying to cook within a fearless draft scenario, and then letting it be quote unquote banned and taken away for the rest of the series. In this case, it's probably not worth it in the case of Varus or Kalista for the team of DRX, which makes sense, right? If you're going to increase your chance of a loss very significantly, in your opinion, because you're willing to risk going for a certain pick, then it's probably not worth it, right? Because you could just not lose, and then you would be okay, right? So in this case, DRX have opted for that option, and they are not allowing T1 to get any of these like super power picks. So they end up opting for the Corki opener instead, which is really nice because it changes the mid lane pool, as well as basically creates a different direction for their draft. And I think this is something they needed, right? Usually what happens if one thing doesn't work, one style doesn't work, you just blow it up, try a new style. And I really like that sort of mindset here. However, what you can see here is that the jungle pool was a little bit choked. So you can see the pressure here from DRX. They probably actually panic picked, and they're not too used to the fearless draft scenario because they basically picked Wukong into double AP solo laners. So while on one hand it makes sense because your priority, you have to play an AD jungler here if you're T1, so you know what options they have, and you probably can just take it away from them. However, with that in mind, you are setting yourself up for a world of hurt here if you are T1. But when you have smaller pools like this, and when you have more issues with the amount of viable champions in the pool, I think this is just going to be a more common thing. Like drafts are going to get a little more scrappy as you get on, and I think pivot picks and like being able to cook in certain scenarios is going to be the name of the game here. So I think instead of teams I would like to see teams instead of just going down the list of meta, if that makes sense, versus really getting creative and thinking about, what? Maybe I could pick Fiddlesticks here or something completely random like that, just going for something crazy and switching it up, like Elise support, right? And now contextually, this actually makes so much sense. This doesn't really have too much to do with the fearless draft scenario because I think this is relatively independent. The two champions for support that were gone don't really contribute to this. It's more about Elise being Elise and synergizing really well with the Caitlyn here, right? It's a great combo with the Caitlyn because it's basically like Kate Lux. It's similar, as a similar sort of poke style, or rather pick style. You play off the cocoon, you can go for a one shot. However, because she's literally a jungler, she has some of the highest skirmish potential in the entire game at the earlier stages. And while Leona loves to go in for skirmishes, when you engage on a jungler, it's usually not going to go too well, right? You're just going stat for stat, ban for ban, and you're going to end up losing out here. So what ends up happening is that DRX round themselves out with a comp that's like decent, but it doesn't necessarily achieve much. It's just a good old classic comp. And if it's on T1 to basically blow the game open, right? And if they don't, then they deserve to lose essentially, because they've been given as many resources as possible in order to essentially succeed. And I think you can kind of tell based on the vibe of these two drafts that T1 are more willing to be experimental here, despite of their player change. And while it seems that DRX have great ideas, they're not too creative in terms of their how dynamic they want to be with draft. And I think this is something that each team culturally has to think about and kind of be cognizant of when they go for these things. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. So yeah.